Hey, what's up everyone? Mekkah here. Welcome back to another Fire Emblem archetype tier list, and today we're going to take a look at early game healers, early healing girls, and some guys. There are some guys that do it. We have a ton of them. So my criterion for these is basically they have to be unpromoted, they have to be unmounted, and they have to join relatively early in the game and be capable of healing, and that has to be like their main function kind of thing. So with that in mind, let's look at the units that we've got here. I have Reese. He is not in FE3, but he is in FE1, FE11, and FE12, and I don't have his FE1 portraits on this tier list maker, so we're going to have to make do with what we have. We have Rena from FE3 and FE11. She's also in FE12, but in that game, she joins way too late to be considered an early game healer. She joins in like the final chapter. Same goes for FE3 Book 2, so she's only the Book 1 version here. Malizia is in both FE3 Book 2 and its remake FE12. Yumina, same thing. They should be in a different order though. There we go. So that's Yumina, or Yumina, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it. We have Silk from Gaiden and Shadows of Valencia, as well as Genny from the same games. We have Idean from FE4 Generation 1. Her daughter, Lana, this is Lana, from FE4 Gen 2. She actually has a substitute that we should probably put in there. Let me put her in here real quick. Here we go, we got Mana as well. This is why I was confused about their names a little bit. So she was usually called Lana or Rana, and she's called Mana. Almost the same unit for a lot of the parts, but still important to distinguish between the two a little bit. We got Saffy from FE5, Thracia 776, Ellen from the Binding Blade, Sarah from the Blazing Blade, Moulder and Natasha from the Sacred Stones, Reese from Path of Radiance, Laura from Radiant Dawn, Lissa from Awakening, Sakura from Fates. I decided to leave out Jacob and Felicia for one because Fates is not my specialty, and for two I feel like they're a very different brand of units than these like early game Cleric girls. A lot of these cannot even attack or like fight back or at all. Jacob and Felicia, they feel functionally very different. I know they get like 40 levels or like 39 levels to level up, so in a lot of aspects they are not pre-promotes, but I think they're a little too different to do these. Three houses, my usual criterion for selecting them for a tier list is like if their canonical appearance, like their part 2 appearance matches the ones of the other units I'm tiering, I'll usually throw them on there. It's a little difficult when your criteria are mostly based around their early game appearance, which, you know, that kind of clashes with the whole how do they appear as part 2 thing. So what I'm also using as a guideline is like, who did I leave out when it comes to, for example, my my magical girls and magical boys tier lists, who kind of canonically, with the like talents and everything, steers towards faith magic and healing specifically, and like with the learned spells as well. So we got, for that reason, we have Mercedes, Flame, and Mariana, and I think between those and the magical girls and boys, we've pretty much covered all the magical students from three houses. Hopefully I didn't forget any, but I don't think I did. Technically almost anyone can be an early game cleric if they want to be, but these I think focus the most on healing spells, but their reason magic is sometimes pretty formidable as well. Now, for those of you wondering where the big tier list is going, it's not going anywhere, of course, but I always said I'm going to do both the big tier lists and the archetype tier lists from now on. They're quite a bit of work to make, record, edit, etc., so it's kind of hard to get one of these out, or one of both out every week, so it's probably going to be like one of these pretty much every week on Mondays, usually I think I try to release them, so that's where those are going. But I'm still using the overlay that Rin made because it's just fantastic. I think at this point you probably realized that in the bottom right corner of your screen, I should be putting the Fire Emblem 7 stream that I did like a long time ago as a little bit of footage to watch. And I really enjoyed this overlay. I changed it a little bit, made the tier list screen a little bit bigger. Some advice from Don actually, because it was like a lot of wasted space, which I agreed with. Which I agree with. So there we go. Other than that, let's just get into it because we've been talking for 5 minutes and there's been no tiering just yet. So, Reese from FE1, we should talk about it. This thing doesn't have FE1 sprites, but we should talk about him because he's interesting. So, in FE1, you don't get XP from healing, and that means Reese is very tough to level up. Now, there's one staff, yeah, I think it's a staff, we can call it a staff. In FE1, that's the warp staff, and it has infinite range and lets you teleport units across the map. That's really good for units that can use it, but unfortunately Reese is not one of them at base level. He starts with, I think, 3 weapon level. Seren's Force says warp is 6, but I've been told it's 5 instead. But either way, he's got to level it up 2 or 3 times, and his growth is only 2% or 20%. Weapon level works in FE1 kind of like it does in FE3, where you just have one stat called weapon level instead of all these different weapon levels for like swords, lances, axes, etc. So that's why I'm referring to it as weapon level as one stat, because it is. and you only level it up by, well, leveling up your stat. It grows just like your strength or your speed. So that means Riss is to level up, and when you don't gain any speed from healing, that's kind of tough to do with a Cleric. The best way to level up Riss is to let him see combat, let him get attacked, and then he actually gains the XP as if he killed the enemy, which is kind of strange when you think about it. But he does. Like, I had him like fight a pirate in chapter 9, he just gained like 28 XP for just getting his bald head smashed in by an axe, so yay, good work. Now, you have to do this like 4 times to just get him to level up 1 time, and that's obviously pretty inefficient, especially when he's not even that great of a warper. Like, even if he gets there, you get quite a lot of other units in FE1 that can also do it. Lena can do it at base, Wendell can do it at base from what I can tell, Boa can do it at base. So there's really no good reason to like get Riss to that level. All he's really used for generally is just healing people, which might be one of the reasons why they left him out of FE3. He just feels very extraneous almost. FE1 Riss, if I had a sprite for him, it would be like D tier or max, I feel like, because the healing on it by itself is like, it's okay, but it's not super fantastic to the point where you want him like all the way up there. But it's interesting. FE3 Riss is like a vulnerary. Like, they just took his village where you like recruit him in FE1 and they just replaced him with a vulnerary. It's like, why? they just didn't want to Riss in that game. So we can't even talk about FE3 Riss because it just doesn't exist. They did put him in Shadow Dragon, thankfully. They gave him back his lines where he's like, yeah, you should take me with me, you won't regret it or whatever. It's kind of funny. That Riss, still not the greatest way to get to a warp, because his base rank of staves, like this time it's actual staff rank, it's still E, so he has the same weapon rank in staves, the same proficiency in staves as like a reclassed Draug or a reclassed Castor or a reclassed Cain or Abel or something. He's no better at staves than anyone else. Now, he does get to practice a little bit before other units join. He gets to practice all the way through chapters 1 and 3 before the others get to reclass into like a staff user. But he can only use a maximum of like 20 heals in that time, because that's the only heal staff you get. You can't buy any until chapter 4, either in the prep screen, or I think there might be like a vendor or something where you can buy it. So there's like almost no advantage to using Riss over any other staff user. Now, of course, you could use multiple staff users, but the thing about a spell like Warp, or I keep calling it a spell because of 3 houses and everything, and like echoes, but you only need a max of like 1 or 2 warps per map generally. If you need a little bit more, you generally have enough warpers available at base level at that point where you do, like it's like late game where you have like Wendell and Lena and Boa. So having another warp user doesn't really add very much to your ranks. And when your only advantage as a healer, as like a staff user over generic healers basically, is less than half of a rank, it's a pretty damn low achievement. Actually, I'd say less than half of rank, but 20 heals users should give you 40 weapon staff XP. So technically, you could be almost a D, but it's still not very high, right? It's like Maria level. By the way, I left off healers that are not very like early joining, and sometimes I've been a little strict with this because you can tell I had like 2.5 rows of these already, and these can get pretty long as it is. So I left off Mist, I left off Tina, I left off all the mounted healers, and I left off Jacob and Malizia, for example. And I left off a couple of others that like joined a little past the like early mid game basically. I made an exception for Flame because she missed out on the Magical Girls tier list. I would not generally call her an early game healer, even though it's like chapter 6 is not that late. But that's why some of the other units are not on here. So yeah, Riss and FE11 not fantastic. You can get to warp, you can, it just doesn't add very much. And the healing in like Shadow Dragon and New Mystery as well, as we're gonna see, is very weak. It's like magic divided by 2 plus 8 or something, so generally he heals like 10 HP per battle, which is not a whole lot. Not that there's a whole lot of competition of like better forms of healing, you don't really get any elixirs or anything, so you have to rely on like forts and vulneraries when you have them, but it's not that great. So I don't think this Riss is very good. He can become a warper and he can be like an okay healer, but generally not the most interesting staff utility. Staff utility though gets a lot more interesting than just healing. It's just that Riss cannot really do a whole lot of it. But in a lot of other games, you have stabs like the Warp staff I just mentioned. Rescue is very interesting. Rewarp is very interesting. Restore, Barrier, all kinds of other stuff. Like some personal stabs like Hammer are super cool. There's Thief stabs in the series. There's just a lot of cool Faith and white magic kind of spells that are just super cool. And Riss is not the most interesting of them, but we're definitely going to discuss a couple. And that makes the healers like quite a bit more interesting, because generally the utility of a healer is just, okay, you use the healer's turn to have someone else gain some HP so that they can do combat again for a turn without having to spend a turn doing a vulnerary. Or maybe you want to heal them like a lot, so you heal them with both a healer and a vulnerary. That is generally what healers are good for. Like, take Rutger for example in FE6. If you heal him, then he won't have to spend his turn using the Vulnerate. Instead, he can use his Killing Edge to kill an enemy. So basically, your healer added an extra turn to Rutger, which is a great way to look at them. They save other units their turns. In exchange, of course, you have to protect them because they're like quite defensive. And I just got a notification on my phone. Thanks, phone. Alright, so as I was saying, healers help others be more defensive is probably a better way to put it. You could think of them as increasing other units' durability in exchange for their own turn, I guess, in exchange for a deployment slot and use of their staffs, but those are not huge opportunity costs. Generally, you almost always want a healer. So, now that we've had FE11 Wrys out of the way, we should get into FE12 Wrys. So, FE12 Wrys, not too different from FE11 in a lot of ways. He joins early, but it doesn't get too much of an opportunity to make use of it because of how slow weapon XP and XP gain is for him. It's quite decent if FE12 and FE11 at first, but XP kind of slows down for healing as you go along. But it's not as bad as like GBA, for example. You still only get like maybe 15 max per heal, I believe. So in FE12 he joins in the prologue like halfway through it almost, and then you keep him for a while, and then he disappears until 3x when he rejoins. And at that point you already have like a couple of other healers that will probably be more useful to you. Again, his staff rank is quite low. You can get him to C stabs in prologue if you go really hard, but that's about the limit of it. Now, how useful Wrys is exactly kind of depends on your difficulty level, because, for example, reaching C rank stabs is quite a big deal in FE12 when you have the warp staff, but that is not available on Lunatic. So, for that reason, I think Wrys is like a good argument for him being worse on Lunatic than on other difficulties. In general, I found that when playing Lunatic or even Maniac or even Hard mode, healing, unless you have like a really good heal staff like a Mend or a Recover, you're not going to heal enough to like let someone take another hit. Some semi-fragile units like, I don't know, Marth or Draug in like some other class that isn't Armor Knight, once they take a hit from like a really strong enemy, just a single heal isn't going to patch them up to be ready to take another. And I don't think that's really Wrys' fault, it's more like the heal formula in general is bad, but that doesn't mean they need some other form of healing in addition to that. And I found it quite annoying. I don't know if I want to penalize Wrys for it, because it's not really, like, there's no better alternative to just, you know, using more healers on someone, like using a fort or healing them twice or using a vulnerate in addition to healing. It's just something I've noticed a lot. But FE12 Wrys, it's so easy to get a good staff rank on other people in that game. There's like quite a few competitors for a high staff rank. You got like Wendell, you got Edsel, you got, well, you don't get Boa in that game, but you do get Malizia especially. And again, you don't really need more than one or two of those early on, and later on when you do want more, you have more options. The rescue staff is available, but it's E rank, so literally anyone can use it, and because any staff that has range has infinite range, the extra magic doesn't really do anything. Not that Wrys' magic is that great to begin with, so I'm not going to say he's bottom tier, but I don't think he's like a whole lot better or worse than his FE11 tier, so I'm just going to put him next to each other right here in D tier for now. I don't think he's very good. I like his healing in the prologue though. Without his healing in the prologue, yeah, you'd have to have a really bad time, but that's like the only time when he really shines. Once he rejoins in 3x, I don't think he's really that great. I don't think he's like a meme tier, but I think he's pretty bad. All right, next up we got we got Lena from FE3 and FE1 and also FE11 and not FE12. So this is a good warper. This is a good warper right here. I had FE11 Lena in my top 15 best units of all time for a good reason, because warp is just so busted, and for some reason in these Arcanea games they were like, you know what, you can have warp in chapter 3 with someone that can use it, and you can have infinite range. So basically they're saying, if you don't like this map, just skip it and go to the next one, it'll be fine. You don't have great boss killers in FE3, which is the first line we're going to talk about. Not yet. That game doesn't have the Wing Spear or even the Rapier or anything like that. But you can make Marth into a good enough unit to where he can warp into bosses and kill them. If you raise him enough, give him all the stat boosters and stuff. And FE1, it's like the most efficient way to play the game actually. And FE3 Book 1, about the same story really. If you want to skip the game, your best bet is investing into Marth, because if Marth is your boss killer, then you only need to warp once per map, and that means that 7 uses on the warp last you quite a long time. I do believe there are games where Hammer cannot repair warp. Shadow Dragon is not one of them, fortunately. In FE, I'm actually going to look this up real quick, because this is something important for Lena. Alright, I tried looking it up or asking around, but no one was around, and I can't find it right now. But whether you're able to repair warp is actually like, pretty important, because only Rena or Lana can use the Hammer and Staff in the first Arcanane games, the FE3 and Book 1 and FE1. And I do remember that there was at least one of FE3 and FE1 where you cannot repair the warp staff. Granted, you only get it like very late in the game, and until then you have like plenty of uses. Just when like your old one runs out, you get a new one. So it doesn't impact a whole lot, but I guess it lets you like fix it in the game. I think regardless, Lena is like an easy S tier, like both versions of her. In Shadow Dragon, I think she's actually even better than the FE3 version, because in that game you have better boss killers, so warp skipping becomes a lot more reliable and less contingent on having a good Marth, and you just warp in Sita, and like at base level she can kill almost every boss if you want her to with the right investment. So I think in that sense she's even better in that game. And in that game I know for sure you can repair the warp staff with the hammer and staff. You get in like a village in the Kamut chapter, and it's kind of tricky to get, especially if you're playing fast, because Marth cannot both visit the village and seize in the same turn. And you don't have a dancer in that game, so you have to like use a glitch or some kind of distracting shenanigans to get it. But it's pretty cool when you do get it. And it's just another like huge bit on Lena's utility sheet. Really good warp user. I do think there's an argument for like not putting her in S tier. That Horus brought up to me once when I made that top 15 best units of all time. That's because there are quite a few other people who can use warp, and like I said before, you don't need that many, and having an additional one doesn't add very much in most maps. And Rena's staff utility other than warp isn't that great. Shadow Dragon is not really the kind of game where you need a lot of it throughout the map. Like, it's nice to have a healer, but she's far from the only one, and healing is far from the most effective thing in these games, like I've explained before with Reese. So maybe she's not actually the greatest of all time. But for now, I think just the warp skipping capabilities alone are great. But I do think this is more tiering the warp staff than tiering Lena, and she's far from the only one who can use warp. So I could convince to move her down a bit. I do think Hammer is really cool though. Then we have Malizia, again from FE3 Book 2 and from New Mystery. She's the only one who can use the hammer for most of the game in that game. Again, I think Lena can use it too, but she joins in the literal final chapter in that game, so that sucks. And then hammer you actually get pretty early in that game, so you can compare the rescue staff is the best target for it, because that's a staff that increases your mobility, and you can get it early on, and it warrants repairing a lot, so I like that thing a lot. But she's also just like a pretty fine healer in the early game. Sure, she doesn't heal that much because of the mechanics of the game, but she has the best staff rank out of like all her units generally, because her base rank is decent enough, and then you have some time to grow it as well. Like, you get her in the village in chapter 1, so there's plenty of time to get her staff rank up. And staff rank in like these games is not just the rescue staff, like that's E rank, so it's like whatever. At least it's E rank in FE12. But it's also things like the Again staff, for example, the thief staff, the unlock staff, that kind of like miscellaneous whatever utility. All that random utility is pretty nice. So I like her a lot. I don't know if she's like S tier or not, because I don't think there is too much other than those things that I just named. I don't think those things alone are great. Like the lack of warp for most of the game is kind of bad, but she does get to warp in chapter, let's see, should be on chapter 10 or 11 roughly is when you get the warp staff. In the lower difficulties of FE12, again, you don't have it in Lunatic. That is also a factor. You do get it in FE3 though, so that's pretty good as well. I guess like warp for like half the game, I guess, is pretty good. So we'll put her up here, and let me just fix the thing real quick. Okay, so I do think that this version is actually like I think she has more options than she does. The FE12 version, I think, has more options than the FE3 one does. Not entirely sure on which one of these is better. I'm definitely sure that Lena is better than the FE3 version, but I'm not entirely sure about Malizia versus FE3 Malizia. Yumina joins in chapter 4 in both New Mystery and in FE3 Book 2. And she's alright. I haven't really used her full time, but she has a similar thing going on like Malizia, where she joins early enough to where you can get her staff rank up high. She actually joins with the rescue staff. I'm not going to count that as like an advantage for her. Like, I'm not going to count the rescue staff's utility and all of it in her favor just because she joins with it, but she joins with it in a good position where you can use her rescue staff to get someone else over there and help out Sirius and Ogma and Ubello and herself, keep him safe in that position. That is a pretty good utility. It doesn't just save turns in like LTC to get Marth over there quickly, but sometimes they also need help depending on, like, let's say you're playing FE12 Lunatic, you definitely want to use the rescue staff. If you don't have like a specific configuration of units, like you know exactly how to play that chapter, rescue staff using that chapter is almost mandatory. And from there on out, I mean, rescue staff utilities is pretty good, but other units can do it, so I'm not going to count it for her as much, but I still think she's pretty good. In the scope of like how good every other unit in FE12 is though, I don't think she's like super standout. The stack utility is nice, but I mean, It's not that great. I think it depends on like whether her rescue staff. I'm gonna check something real quick. Alright, I knew something was up. She's the only one who can use the rescue staff in FE3. That is pretty important, actually. That is pretty important. So with that in mind, actually, she is definitely worse because she cannot use the rescue staff. She's definitely the worst one of the Malizias because she cannot use the rescue staff. She's the only one who can use it. That puts her like way up here, actually, because for example, the desert chapter, if you don't have the rescue staff there, boy, you're gonna spend a lot of turns. I'm gonna put her like here, I guess. Yeah, I think she's actually better than FE3 Malizia in that regard. Rescue staff is super nice, and that makes her a lot worse in comparison to her, in comparison to Yumina. I know these are all girls, so I should probably be more specific, but we're gonna put her like around here somewhere. Maybe here. Not entirely sure, because there's a lot of ways you can use staves in FE12. There's a lot of competition over that, but she is one of the better ones for sure. So I'm not entirely sure where to put her. I think she's all right. Next up, we have Silk from Gaiden and Echoes. I think I can reasonably put her all the way up in S tier. I think that is something that cannot be contested. I could even argue her being better than Lena in some cases, but for now, we'll keep her here. Lena does have the better warp, but Silk has a more exclusive warp. Silk is the only one for a long time that can use the warp spell in Gaiden, and God, you need it, because in Gaiden, almost everyone has shitty move. And when she gets warped, the game gets so much quicker. Gaiden Silk, I think, is actually the better one between the two Silks. I know there's only one portrait on here, but in Echoes, Silk's warp has like, I don't know, like magic range or something. Like that's about it. Like magic ×1 is her range, I think. And then in the original Gaiden, it's just infinite range. It's so good and so helpful to have. It does require you to raise her, which is quite a painful affair. Healing itself does not give you XP, and in fact it reduces your HP. It's a spell you use just like offensive spells, and it loses you HP. And in order to get EXP, she has to use a Nosferatu spell. Nosferatu will of course drain enemy HP, so that way she can get some HP back that she lost during healing, so that's nice. But Nosferatu is not fun to use, and it's like, I think it's like 60 hits, maybe 50 hit. It's very shaky. It doesn't get affected by terrain or stats or anything, it's always 50 hit, but that is always super shaky. You can boost it with supports and echoes, but in Gaiden, you're just kind of shit out of luck. You're just gonna have to deal with the fact that she has shitty hit on everything, and even in echoes, she's gonna have shitty hit on everything. And if you don't actually like actively give her kills in echoes, I have noticed that she will definitely not make it to level 7 within like Act 1, which you definitely want. You want warp as soon as possible. I've gotten in Gaiden before like the 4th or 5th map that you play. Echoes, it took me a little longer because I wasn't grinding for it as much, and I was playing like kind of fast to get Blitzkrieg. But oh boy, when you get warp, it's just so nice to move all these units, because almost 5 move, but just about everyone else just has 4 move, unless they're like villagers turning into Cavalier, and Cavaliers are bad, or like Claire. But there's people like Lucas, or like even Alm's 5 move needs a boost, even Grey with Lightning Sword needs a boost. Giving these units mobility to reach all these enemies that start like far away from you to route maps ASAP is just super nice. Reach certain choke points, like I don't know, a bridge in the middle of the map or some part of the castle, skipping certain walls. Warp is just too nice not to have. And Silk, if she's not spending almost every turn warping, it's just a lost cause. In Echoes, Silk has the advantage that there's another available Cleric in Fae that can heal her, so she doesn't have to rely on Nosferatu to get her HP back, and they can also keep healing each other, because every time they heal, they lose a point of HP, which they can then heal back, so it kind of turns into kind of like a healing circle jerk, and that is also super useful to get him up there. Silk is just super nice to have. She's all the utility. I don't remember if she has Invoke. I know a lot of the other clerics do that. But honestly, it's hardly even relevant, because Warp is just alone is just so good that nothing else is going to change her ranking for me. Like, just the fact that she has this is so nice. Okay, she does get Invoke, but it's pretty late. It's really late. Now, on the other hand, Invoke is a pretty huge part of Genny's kit. She is also in Shadows of Valencia and Gaiden, and she's pretty okay there. I kind of like the Invoke spell there. I don't know how useful it's going to be in my Blitzkrieg playthrough, because any enemy that attacks a summoned enemy is one that's probably not going to die, because those summons are quite weak. But I know they have their uses, especially in more casual playthroughs. So I'm not going to ditch it. And it's not like it's her only trick either. She also gets Physic. She gets the Expel thing. You'll want it known as Deer, which just gets rid of monsters entirely without fighting them. All that kind of stuff is pretty good. And just having a healer when there's almost no one else to heal is nice. There's literally no one else who can heal until Celica gets it in her route in early in Act 2. And I mean, you do take a lot of hits just by playing the game, and it doesn't hurt either that all the other magical units like Celica, Bowie, and May, they take damage when they're using spells, so no matter what, even if they never get hit, they still take damage. So just through that utility alone, Genny is as useful as any early game healer. But no warp is kind of a letdown, unfortunately. But other than that, I think she's still like pretty good. I think she's like, I think she's definitely better than Yumina. The question is she good enough for B tier? I would say the early invoke is pretty goddamn good, so I'm gonna put her up here for now. Maybe I'm overrating her a little bit. Maybe she's only this good, because I do know it takes quite a while to promote her. I believe you need to be level 12 to promote to Priestess, or whatever the class is called. So that takes a while. But at the same time, her utility is pretty good. So I'm gonna put her up here for now. I think she's alright. I don't think she's like excellent. I don't think she stands out as much as like a personal rescue staff or personal hammer and like early game staff utility for like higher rank staff utility and everything else. But she's still pretty alright. But definitely the unit I'm gonna get more experience with soon to have like a more final judgment on how good she is. But I definitely like her. I definitely think she's great. I don't know if she's better than these other units, and I don't know if she would like hold up in this. If I were to put her like on a big tier list, I don't know if she'd stay in B tier, or if she'd be surpassed by things like, I don't know, GBA Cavaliers, for example. A lot of those are like B/A tier. I think those are reasonably better than her. But again, your mileage may vary. Then we have Idean from FE4 Gen 1. I remember Mags rating her like very high, like 4 stars or something, and I remember was more modest about her, like 3 stars back then. Only 5 move in FE4 where everyone is mounted is a pretty big problem, and generally I find that Idean is most useful at the home castle to just warp people that come home and warp into other castles in like chapters 2 and 3. Mostly those chapters. She does join early and she does have healing utility, but generally she's not going to be near combat often enough to actually save units that are fighting. I think usually like in chapter 3 you get like a physics staff, or at the end of chapter 2 you get like a physics staff that you can use to help her contribute even at long range, but even then she can get outpaced by quite a while. At some point, like even 10 range is not enough to keep up with other units, because when you have only 5 move and other units are moving at like 8 to 9 tiles every turn plus row tiles, eventually you just end up out of range just by the nature of things, and that really sucks. But warp utility I still think is pretty nice. It's kind of like with the other warps. I mean, in FE4 you warp people between castles rather than across the map. But the principle is the same, where having multiple warpers doesn't really do anything for you. In fact, in FE4 you can't even use multiple warps because, well, you can only use, you only have 1 warp staff and you can't trade it around like that. And you can use it in the castle, but once you've used your turn you cannot trade it around. So having multiple warpers doesn't really do anything. So let's say Idean wasn't there, you would instead just warp with Deirdre instead. So you don't really lose your warp utility if you don't have Idean. You do get the warp staff by having like a tall combo with Idean, but that's not the same thing, obviously. So I don't think Idean does anything that you wouldn't have without her, if that makes sense. The one thing she does is like she makes 2 kids, but I don't give people credit for the kids utility, because the things that Lana does for you, I'm not going to give Idean credit for those. I'm going to give the credit for those to Lana. So I don't think that really counts either. I'm also not going to give Tinny, or like I'm not going to give Tiltu credit for what Tinny does or Arthur does. I'm not going to give Lacus credit for what Dermot does. I'm not going to give Sigurd credit for what Selef does. None of that makes sense to me. I'm going to credit units for their own utility, and Idean doesn't really have a whole lot of it. The one thing I do like about her is like when she promotes, she can hold her own in the arena and gather some of her own money. That is like the most positive thing I can say about her. But other than that, I don't think she's very good at all. She's like a good part of utility in FE4, but I don't think there's a whole lot she can do that stands out that makes me say, yeah, I really recommend you use Idean for this. This is really good. So I'm actually going to put her here, which seems like a very low rating for a unit that's really just decent in her own right. I mean, healing and staff utility is nice. It's just she doesn't really do a whole lot in practice. There's not a whole lot you can do with her that you can't do without her. So for that reason, I'm rating her pretty lowly. It's not that her stats are like awful or anything. She can't fight early on, but I don't even need her to. It's just she's kind of not very relevant in FE4. I have no other way to put it. It's kind of strange for me to put her down as low. I don't think I've rated Idean in any capacity before other than those star ratings in Max's LP. So this seems a little strange to have her like this far down, but I can't really come up with a good niche for Idean. She's 5 move as Garbo. It doesn't help that the High Priest class only has 5 move too, whereas there's like a lot of other magical classes that have more. Sage F6, War Mage F6, and they have like better weapon ranks too. And then there's Mage Knight, which doesn't have great weapon ranks, but at least it has a mount, which is a lot better. But High Priest is just kind of Garbo. I guess rescue utility is kind of nice when she's promoted. I guess that's okay, but it's still better to just give that to Lagases, so it's not even that useful. But you do get the rescue staff through conversation with Idean. But again, I don't give credit to like items in their inventories. Now, as uninteresting as Idean is in FE4 Gen 1, Lana is a lot more interesting in Gen 2. Lana presents a bit of a dilemma where she and her brother Lester cannot really be both as good as they could be at the same time. Lester needs a dad with pursuits most of all, and usually you pick Midir because Midir can also pass down bows as well as pursuits. There's no other dad that does that. You can pass down bows through like Jamka or Arden, and Jamka also gives you the access to the hero bow. But other than that, it doesn't really, like, there's no real alternative for him to get both bows and pursuits unless you use the pursuit ring. But that pairing kind of leaves Lana in the dust. She doesn't become useless, she just kind of becomes Idean version 2.0, where you just have like the most basic staff rank, B rank before promotion, A rank after. And her magic doesn't really get a whole lot more impressive, and she doesn't really do anything that your other units do not. Again, physic utility, she can like inherit like up to B rank staffs from Idean, so stuff like physic, restore, warp, return, all those kind of things. They just fall in their inventory. Recover as well, so not topping people off is never an issue for her. Recovers like 50 uses, so it's never going to run out. So that kind of stuff is not an issue for her. It's just, again, you kind of want a mounted healer to keep up with Self for most of the game. So people like Nana and Fee and Promoted Leaf are much more useful generally than an unmounted healer like her that's just stuck in a 5-move class again. Once again, promoting to High Priest, not the greatest thing ever. On the other hand, if you're willing to sacrifice Lester's utility to make Lana as good as possible, which you could do, and actually recommend it if you're doing like an LTC run or something, you can go with Claude Idean or even Azel Idean, and that will give you access to the rescue staff in both Gen 1 and Gen 2 like a lot more quickly. In fact, if you want Lana to have the staff rank for rescue at base level, you need to do Claude Idean. Then you have a convo in Chapter 5 where you get the rescue staff to Idean. Pretty sure you give it to Idean, maybe to Claude, I don't remember. But either way, you pass it down to Idean, or to Lana, and then suddenly you have an A rank staff user in Chapter 6. And that means you can use Rescue to move Seliph and other units forward if you want to. Of course, it'll only be a little bit at first, because once you rescue Seliph once and he just moves ahead, you're never gonna boost his movement again because he's just so far ahead of your rescue staff user. But it also means that as soon as you promote Leaf to a Master Knight, you have access to the rescue staff potentially much earlier than you would have before. You might get it as early as like the start of Chapter 8, whereas otherwise you would probably have it start of Chapter 9 or start of Chapter 10 if you didn't pass it down. So that's a pretty big difference. And Lana herself also becomes a lot more useful with A rank staffs compared to B rank staffs, because you can use Fortify to heal our units, or she also would have just more range, or not more range, she'd always have 10 range with the staffs in V4, but she would heal more, have more magic. She promotes sooner because Fortify just gives a buttload of XP. I think you get 65 or 75 per casting, whereas otherwise you're stuck with like Recover and stuff like that, where it's like you're never going to get more than like 35 per turn, or like maybe I think Warp might gives like 45 and then return is like 35, so the Fortify is a pretty big boost. So as long as she has the money to sustain it, she's going to be able to promote sooner, and that means she's going to be able to stand on her own legs sooner, and by that I mean like promote, fighting the arena, get her own cash, and a pretty good return on your investments. But that does require making Lester really bad, because if you make Claude pair with Idean, Lester gets a very low strength stats and no skills and no bow inheritance. So you have an iron bow unit that doesn't double with the lowest strength you could possibly have. So you are sacrificing Lester's utility by doing that, but that makes Lana as good as possible. With all this in mind, I think the average Lana is around C tier probably. Always a little better than Idean, I think, but not a whole lot. The Claude version is the best, but it does require dragging Lester down, and her other versions are kind of bad. So I think on average it's still like around Idean's level. If you take into account that she could be a lot better, or that she's like kind of the same, I think she's generally better than Idean, but not by a whole lot in most pairings that I think are viable. I generally think it's important, if you want to use all your units, to have like both a good Lester and a reasonable Lana. And Lana cannot really be made worse than Idean, but Lester can definitely be ruined with the wrong pairing. So she's more like immune to a bad parent than Lester is. And that could be either a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. Next up is Mana, who is basically another one of the same units, but only this time you have no inheritance. So she joins in Chapter 6 with only a heal and no noteworthy skills. In fact, I'm pretty sure she has no skills at all. And if you have no skills at all, then there's almost nothing to say about her. She can be useful through like buying stuff, but the problem is When you don't inherit anything, you also have like a much lower amount of gold to work with. So having access to better staves it comes at a price of buying other ones. Whereas like Lana gets almost everything she wants for free, but Mana has to buy pretty much everything, and that really, really sucks. Just like staves are pretty expensive, and she has no way to gain money other than visiting villages. And it's also harder to get a 5-move unit to villages than like a 6-move unit or a mounted unit. So everything comes at an opportunity cost, and that makes her significantly worse than these units in my opinion. So I actually think it's reasonable to move her down a tier for that. Like here, honestly I think I would put her around here. I don't think she's that good. I never really thought about her too much. A lot of people ask for substitute playthroughs a lot whenever I see something related to FE4. They ask for substitute ratings, they ask for substitute playthroughs, substitute Ironmans, as if it's like an extra challenge, but really it generally just makes the game even slower and more boring. Like, it accentuates all the bad parts of FE4. So I'm generally not too enthusiastic about it, and she's like a very good example of a boring substitute. I talked like last episode of the archetype tier lists about Linda and how like exciting she is as a substitute because she has so many traits. But she is the exception, she's not the norm. She's, I think, the only like really interesting substitute. There's a couple of others that are good or have like something about them, but most of them are kind of this boring. Most of them are really, really boring. And she's definitely one of them. She has some kind of trait, I think, some kind of talk convo, but it's not notable enough to like move her up a tier. All substitutes have like some weird kind of convo, like Dimna, and now he gets +5 strength, but she really doesn't have anything like that. Nothing as noteworthy as that. Now, someone who does have something as noteworthy as that is Saffy, because oh my god, Saffy is insanely good. The only healer from Thracia that I have on here, I know there's like plenty of staff users that we could talk about when it comes to Thracia. I could include Tina, but I think she joins a little too late to be eligible for this list. But Saffy, she joins in chapter 3, so I think it's reasonable to have her on here. So, first of all, I think almost everyone who has finished Thracia knows how broken 8-rank staff is throughout the game. But what makes Saffy special is the early access to warp, just like Silk really. You get a warp staff as early as chapter 8 basically, and you want to make use of it around chapter 10. It's generally the first chapter I break it out for, if not 11. And Saffy's the only one who's going to be able to use it unless you staff spam Asbel for like 200 turns or something. That's the only other way you're going to get a high rank staff user like that early on. Saffy starts with C rank and then a huge bonus to the point where she only needs like 10 heals to get to B rank. And then if you promote her, she gets one more rank, so she goes from B to A no matter what you do. So at that point, she's at A rank stats guaranteed. You can also just have her heal until she hits A rank. I've done that before too. Just spam healing on a poison guy if you want to. That saves you a master seal early on. I still like to promote her at some point because it has other perks. It improves her stats, it gives her the ability to attack sometimes, and it makes it easier to grow more stats. At some point, like, she hits level 20, and you want to be able to grow her more levels so she can get more magic, because the magic stat on healers is actually pretty significant. Most of the time when it comes to healing, I don't think magic is too important. Usually a unit is healed enough through like the base healing of a heal spell and like a little bit of magic to where they can take another hit or two. Depends on the game, of course. I know in the DS emblems are a little worse. But for other staff utility, like for example when there's ranged involved, like rescue range and awakening for example, I think is significant. Other games too. In Saffy's case, all staffs she uses are either one range or like infinite range. But in her case, the higher magic helps her hit more targets with, for example, sleep staves, silent staves, and especially in the end game, there's a lot of like really high magic targets that you want to reach. And the more 20 magic units you have with A rank staves, the better. And she's definitely someone who can reach it easily. Her magic ranking is pretty good, both her base and her growth. And then like all the staves you can use are just fantastic in utility. Warp to skip chapters and get mobility. Rescue to get units that are far away from you, close to you, save them from like precarious positions. Silence and sleep staves to disable dangerous enemies. Restore staves to make sure your units don't get slept or silenced, or when they do that you can cure them. Or berserk especially is a big deal. Magic up to make sure other units get higher magic. That's usually something you cast on Saffy rather than something that Saffy casts herself, but you can do it with Saffy if you want to. And there's a lot more too that I'm forgetting right now. Her attacking power is not that great. She actually cannot attack before promotion. As a result, she gets captured a lot, but you can use that to your advantage by capture baiting enemies and have them killed more easily, because by capturing they have their own stats. And so you need to make sure to trade away Saffy's weapons before you do. One thing you don't have to trade away from her is her own personal hammer and staff, because enemies will never take that for some reason. They see it and they're like, I can't use that. Never mind, I'm not going to take it. But Hammering is super good in Thracia. There's a lot of personal weapons to repair. I like to repair the warp staff a lot. Fixing it to be able to skip more chapters or beat more chapters more quickly or have more utility. I usually hammer the warp staff. Tina's thief staff is a great target for hammering, and in that sense you can think of hammering as a way to get more enemy weapons. But really it's just like it's like a wild card. It lets you use anything you want more often, and it also includes things like Leaf's Lightbrand or Asbel's Gref Caliber or Nana's Earth Sword. Whatever you want to repair, you can use hammering on it, and then you will have more uses. And in Thracia, you don't even have to be careful about using those things up, like just finishing them completely, because they turn into broken weapons. You can repair them whenever you want. So for that reason, I think Saffy is the best unit in Thracia, and actually the best unit so far on this list. I don't think any other unit is as good as Saffy is. Like, absolutely bonkers. And that's really good, because when you think about it, how often do you have a unit that just cannot attack, that isn't a dancer, that's like the best unit in the game, or the most valuable unit on your team at any point in time? She is so good. Doesn't even need to promote to be good, and she's still so good. Absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite units to use of all time. Top 15 for sure. I don't remember exactly how high I had her on the list. I think she was like number 10 or something, but really, really, really good. Next up is Ellen from FE6, the Binding Blade, and Ellen I think is alright. She has a very low magic base, it's like 1, but her growth is okay, so eventually it gets somewhere. It's not unsalvageable, it kind of starts low, but thankfully this is not the DS emblems, and heals a lot more at base, so you don't have to worry too much about not healing enough damage to, you know, make your units take another hit. So as an early game healer, she does alright. Of course, Cleric is like a lot better, and Saul is pretty good as well. I don't actually know why I don't have Saul on this list. I should probably put him on there. I'm going to fetch him in a second, because he seems important enough to have on here. But Ellen's pretty nice early on. I find that I never really want to use her long term. Her durability is absolute garbage. That goes for a lot of these units. Especially Saffy is like very fragile if she actually gets attacked. A lot of units can like take one hit usually without dying, but another one is generally too much to ask for. But Ellen has like 16 HP and 0 defense at base or something. It's super trash. And FE6 enemies have particularly high attack, to the point where she does get killed. So protecting her is extra important. Someone like Saul, they can literally take like one hit, but not Ellen. Definitely not Ellen. And I do know that like if you want to have a warp user in FE6, which you do, it's the game that started the or I could use the warp staff beam for a reason. Warp is very good in this game. It gives you pretty good base range. Like 5 plus whatever your magic is divided by 2, I think the formula is. So, and then there's like a lot of maps that you just want to skip in. I think like chapter 14X, for example, the first chapter you get after you get the warp staff from the desert. That is a map I do not like to play casually. That's a map I definitely want to warp skip. So having a warper available by that point is pretty important to me. If I'm not playing an Iron Man, warp skip is a little too risky for Iron Man, but in most casual playthroughs, skipping that chapter, that stupid disappearing tile chapter, is absolutely phenomenal. 16X, another chapter you really want to have a warper for. Skip some of those floors, I guess you could say, because it's like a tower, right? So you just want to skip a couple of those long like U-turns that you're basically forced to do otherwise. Chapter 4, that the Douglas chapter, chapter 16, the big castle. Also another one where you really want to have a warp staff to cut off some corners, get units to reinforcement zones early to stop them from coming out, or distracting Douglas, or if you want to get Roy on the other side faster, or there's always a use for warp, and warp in FE6 is especially powerful. She is kind of tough to get to warp range as quickly as possible, but if you're playing casually, I think it's doable by chapter 14X for sure. Just not an LTC playthrough, but for most people I think it's doable. Little harder of a time to do it than like Saul, for example, because his staff rank is so good, but otherwise Ellen is like your best warper for a while. You get like other warpers later, but that doesn't mean she can't do other things as well. Like I mentioned the early game healing, but she can also use like the rescue staff that you get around chapter 16. She can use the barrier staff, of course, which you don't get infinite off, but you get like quite a few, and that can be nice to survive a couple more mages with your stronger units if you want to. You have the restore staff, of course. FE6 features a ton of enemy status staff users. The sleep staff, the silent staffs are also pretty good in FE6. The formula is pretty generous towards you with staff accuracy and staff range, so you want to use that to your advantage when you can. So it's not as good as it is in Thracia, but it is pretty nice. I don't know if that makes Ellen very good or not, because there are a lot of better candidates for those staffs, but if we look at Ellen on her own as a unit, I think she's decent. I just don't think she's great. But like lower B or high C seems very valuable to me, so I'm going to put her out there. So then we have Saul, who I just magicked out of nowhere, but I still think he joins early enough to be rated here, joins in chapter 6. Probably the best staff user in all of FE6. at least overall when availability is factored in, because I do think Mime has more utility. I think Yodel can also do more when he joins. But until they are there, I think Saul is the best one. He joins with C rank staffs, whereas Ellen joins with D, and Chlorine does as well. And weapon ranks in FE6 are particularly important because in that game it's notoriously hard to raise your weapon ranks, and that means that having it at base is a bigger advantage, I feel like. You only get 1 weapon XP per staff use no matter which staff it is, so whether you're using heal, or recover, or restore, or sleep, or an S rank staff, you get the same 1 weapon XP. And it takes 50 weapon XP to level up every single level, so it gets from E to D, and then from D to C, etc, etc. So that means Saul's the closest to using Warp, which is A rank. He gets +1 rank from promotion just like everyone else. So that means that he is the closest to get to Warp, and that alone is worth praising. And I think that makes Saul one of the best units in FE6 actually. Not the best, I do think there's like some combat units that have better utility than he does. But he does improve your combat units a lot just by healing them, by warping them, giving them more mobility, more durability, more resistance perhaps through barrier, all those kind of stuff that I mentioned for Ellen. Saul does them, but better. His base magic is significantly higher to the point where slightly lower growth doesn't really matter any. I think his growth is 10% lower, but his base is like 3 or 4 higher. It's still not fantastic, that magic of his. It's still like a base 5 or 6 or something. It's really not that fantastic, but still good enough for me to put him pretty high up, I should say. So I think what I'm gonna do is put him above Genny. I think that is reasonable. Perhaps even up here. Yeah, I do think he's a fair bit better than Genny. Perhaps even better than Malizia. Yeah, I do like him around here. Exclusive rescue staff is hard to beat. It's really hard to beat, especially in a game where you don't get warped for a while. So I'm gonna put him like around here somewhere. But he comes close, I feel like. He's really good. Next up is Sarah from Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade, and she is kind of modeled after Ellen, I feel like, with the way that her magic base is awful, but her growth is decent. And again, she gets outclassed by the monster healer, but I'm not gonna factor that in here. I'm just rating these units off their own merits most of the time. And I think Sarah is decent as a unit, but not fantastic. Having an early game healer is of course always nice. The first parts of Hector mode, especially Hector Heart mode, you do get hit by quite a lot of enemies, especially if you don't over-rely on Marcus and Oswin. People like Hector and Lowen, even though they're more bulky than most units, they still need some healing to get by, and they don't always have time to use Vulnerate. So having Sarah available is nice. And FE7 is not a great game for staff utility, I will say. A lot of the staffs were nerfed. I feel like Sleep and Warp and Silence and stuff were like much less effective in that game due to reduced range and accuracy most of the time. Restore staff is still very relevant, especially in Hector Heart mode though. There's way too many Berserk and Sleep and Silence staff uses in Hector Heart mode. And there's also a couple chapters where just resistance is super important, such as in Cargo Destiny. A chapter like that is perfect for Sarah to get a lot of utility in. She can use almost any staff you want there, and it'll be useful. Like, of course, she can't fight like all these other clerics, not at first, but Guiding Ring promotions are not that competitive in FE7. There's a lot of good Guiding Ring users, and not that many Guiding Rings, but rarely will you be using more than like 2 or 3 at a time. So I do think that the first Guiding Ring should probably go to Canas most of the time. This is also a problem for like Ellen and Saul actually, where there's just so many people you want to promote with Guiding Rings sometimes. So I'm not sure if Sarah is like a good fit for an early promotion, but I feel like even if she doesn't promote, her utility remains around the same. She just heals people and does it fairly well enough with Mend, even despite her low magic. I don't think her low magic is a big detriment to using her when she's just healing people. And I will say, like, even though Priscilla is much better in my opinion, her utility in the desert chapter, even if she's like only slightly trained or trained a little bit, is pretty nice. Having a healer that can like move around all the time. It's just that Priscilla has that advantage on her in every single other chapter. But in the desert, it's quite nice to have her. I do always enjoy having Sarah in the desert, but outside of that, she's definitely the worst option, but still pretty fine to have. Still a pretty fine healer overall. But yeah, FE7 is not a great game for staff utility overall, because Warp is also less useful in that game. There's not as many chapters to skip. I think the only chapter where you do a lot of Warp and you can actually save a lot of your own time with Warp is not Cargo Destiny, that's the one where you get it. Victory or Death, there we go, the Limstella chapter. That's the one where Warp is most helpful. But yeah, I'm gonna put her around B tier, I think. Maybe C tier. Maybe C tier, yeah. Maybe C tier is alright for her, like around here somewhere. I do like Genny a bit better. I feel like she has more staff utility than Sarah does. Next up is Moulder the Boulder. So it's some pretty beefy stats. I'm gonna try not to be biased towards him because I'm playing Troll Emblem right now, where Moulder is, I think it's fair to say, he's the best unit in that game. for some reason, every other unit in that game is, in that hack I made, is like nerfed in some way or form, and sometimes worse than others. Generally nerfed a lot, to the point where people have like 0 move and they just can't move, or they have like no stats whatsoever. And Moulder instead was just given like a lot of magic stats and like a lot of spells that he can use, a lot of weapon levels at base level, so he can fight. But in vanilla gameplay, Moulder is just a good healer, a pretty beefy one, a pretty good one overall. He has C rank staves, so it's kind of like Saul in FE8, where it's just pretty easy to get him to warp overall. He doesn't need to spend a lot of the game spamming staves. If you play fast, if you like an LTC, it's actually a challenge to get him to A rank staves, to get him to promote in time. It's actually pretty important in my Board RN God LTC. But if you're playing casually, it won't be difficult at all to get into A rank staves. And FE8, another game where warp is nerfed like in FE7, where it just has like magic divided by 2 range as opposed to 5 plus magic divided by 2 in FE6. That hurts a little bit, but it helps that warp is very good in the game, map design wise. From the moment you have it in the desert, it's useful in like every single chapter from there on out. There's always something to warp skip. And unlike in, for example, some of these previous games, having multiple warpers or high rank staff users is always nice, because there's almost always something for them to do. Chapters like chapter 20, with all the mountains, you need multiple warpers to get people to places quickly, and it saves you a ton of hassle to just warp people instead of playing it slow and casually and finding through all these reinforcements. So it saves you a ton of hassle that way. Or think of like chapter 19, the Reeve chapter. Not only do you want a warper to get someone to the boss, sometimes you need 2 warps, sometimes you need a torch user to pierce darkness and be able to warp people there, because you can't warp people in the dark. And sometimes you just need to hammer in the warp staff or the rescue staff. So all those kind of little things are things that Moulder can do. So even if you have someone else with a higher staff rank like Saul or Arthur, there we go, or even Natasha, who we're about to discuss, Moulder is still useful. And his magic is also like not bad. It's good enough to function. It's not super amazing like Lutz, for example, but it's still good enough to where like you get like reasonable warp range from him. And then of course he promotes into Bishop, and I mean a lot of these units did. I just haven't really mentioned it because it's almost not significant. But in Moulder's case, promoting to Bishop is very nice because it gives him Slayer, which gives him the ability to just run around monsters as long as he doubles, which he generally does. Because Slayer gives every weapon you use triple effectiveness, and that's pretty good. You usually won't have like a high light rank, so you will use like Divine or something if you want to get like a lot of damage out of him. You probably won't be using Ivaldi. Some people mentioned the weird bug slash thing with Ivaldi, where Ivaldi is like the legendary light tome, and all those legendary tomes have double weapon effectiveness, and they don't stack with Slayer. Instead, the double overrides the triple that you get from Slayer, so it actually does less damage with Ivaldi than like Aura. I never thought this was very relevant because you're probably killing the monster no matter what, but people kept bringing it up in these old debates, so I thought I'd mention this real quick. It's not even a pitfall, it's just a weird dumb thing that people bring up all the time. It doesn't really matter. Moulder can one-round monsters as a bishop. I don't think there's any reason to make him a sage. He has high con, he can use L-Fire without losing speed, but I guess human enemies are more common than monsters, but the difference between having Slayer and not having Slayer is much bigger than the difference between having L-Fire and not having L-Fire as a sage. I think generally as a bishop he puts up enough of a fight, and even if he's not the optimal combat unit, he can still have utility through staves, so you don't even need him to be super good. And instead I'd rather he just be a better support unit most of the time, because I do believe Bishop gives him a higher staff rank. I'm going to double check real quick. Yeah, he gets an additional plus 40 staff rank if he goes Bishop compared to Sage, just like Arthur, for example. So I think that is a big enough reason to go to staff. I'm not sure exactly when you would hit A rank staffs when you're promoting Moulder, but I imagine it could be a nice help to get to S rank sooner. And the S rank staff is actually significant in FE8 because you can use a Latona staff, and no one else can use it at base. In FE6, you always have Yodel to use the equivalent of that game, the Holy Maiden. Just heals everyone fully, cures their status conditions. But in FE8, you don't really have anyone who can use it at base, so having Moulder be able to use it is very nice. And Arthur, you'll probably get to it too, but it'll take a little bit. And even if you already have someone who can use it, he can always use other spells too, or other stats, or you know what I mean. Light magic, white magic, spells, staves, I always mix it up. Anyway, I think Moulder is a solid B tier, maybe even A tier. Yeah, we'll go with B. I think he's better than Genny overall. I would say he's a B tier unit overall. Now Natasha is like a worse version of Moulder in every way. I think the only better thing about her is her magic growth, and her base is so much worse that it doesn't even matter. It takes forever for her to surpass Moulder. If you level them both up, she joins at a lower level with a lower staff rank, and that means she's further from promotion, and she has more trouble getting there because her rank is just worse, so she cannot use better staves. I will say in FE8 it's very nice, you can buy torch staves in the Seraphim shop, and you can use those in chapter 6 and a couple of other chapters and get staff rank kind of quickly, but that doesn't really let Natasha catch up to Moulder because Moulder can just use those all the same. So it doesn't really help her relative to other staff users, but it makes her a little bit better. And it has her a little bit better off than, like, I don't know, FE7 units that cannot buy the torch staff. Actually, they can buy it in Secret Shop. FE6, there we go. That's a game where you only get like one torch staff. And not a whole lot of units can just spam it because you kind of want to keep some users around. So I think Natasha's utility, it's like similar to Moulder's, but it's like worse in every single way possible in ways that are significant. I've always felt like on paper these two units are like kind of close together and it makes sense to like do this, right? Just put them like next to each other. But in practice, I've always found that Natasha is a lot shorter on range and a lot shorter on staff rank, to the point where I think her utility is significantly worse than these other units. I think it's actually reasonable to put her down here somewhere. I don't think she's that good. That said, there's usually still a place for her in some kind of fast playthrough. I actually thought I wouldn't need her in my FE8 LTC, and you can hear it by the commentary. And it turns out at the end I actually did need her to do some minor stuffs here and there. So she's not completely useless, but the utility that Moulder has is a lot more important than the utility Natasha has in such a playthrough. And even playing casually, I think a tier difference is justified. Tier plus difference, honestly. But that doesn't mean she's bad. Mostly just outclassed, but in a vacuum, she'd be like an okay unit still. In the next meme, we have Reese from FE9, Path of Radiance. An early game healer, like all these others. But he's a guy. He's a very frail looking guy. I remember a couple of things about Reese. I haven't really used him that much, but I've seen him in action often enough to know what happens to him when you expose him to enemies. Spoilers, he dies. He has very low luck, very low HP, very low defense, so it's always a risky move. He is like kind of underwhelming as well in a way. There's a lot of things about FE9 that just make me not really like him. One of them is like the other player units are so ridiculously durable, especially in the mid to late games. The earth supports and just the general stat layouts of units make them much less susceptible to dying, to the point where you often don't even want a healer on the field. It's usually like someone like Kieran, Oscar, or Titania, or even Jill or Marcia. They generally don't want Riz nearby to distract enemies from them. They don't want a fragile unit like him in the mid to late game to just run around and like magnet enemies away from them. Because they have enough survivability to survive on their own. Maybe with like a physical here and there. But especially if you give like these paladins Soul, for example, they don't really care about a healer being there. So it can be nice occasionally, but the game is much less heavy on staff utility. There's also no warp staff that you can use to get units further. There is a rescue staff, but an unmounted rescue staff user rescuing these mounted units is generally not going to do much. And you do have mounted units instead that can do it, like Mist and Malizia. So rarely is Riz, or Riz I should say. I'm really used to saying Riz, so I'm probably going to mix it up. I'm going to try to say Reese, because I think it is the right pronunciation. It generally won't be the best option for you. And I've seen a lot of like Reese versus Mist debates about which is better. I haven't included Mist in this because I think she joins a little too late for this. But I really don't think using Reese long term is in your best interest. I think he's supposed to be an early game healer that you use to keep units like Ike and Oscar and Boyd alive in the early game, and then you just kind of bench him. He's just not that useful to have in the long term. Doesn't mean he cannot be good, but I just don't see the point most of the time. Another thing that kind of hurts him is that light magic is ridiculously expensive to like not just buy but forge as well. It has like insane cost to do so, and if there's one thing that's hard in FE9, it's like killing enemies on maniac mode or killing like some of the bulkier late game enemies. And when your magic cannot be forged like that, it's kind of annoying. And like even though like wind magic and like fire magic is like kind of expensive, it's doable. But even for FE9 standards, where you have so much gold, forging light magic is like bleh. It sucks. It sucks. But that's like him as an offensive unit. He can restore people. He can like barrier people. I forgot it's like a different name for barriering people, like ward staff. I think that's what it's called. There's a hammer and staff that he can use. It is all there, but it's all I think to a lesser degree than the other GBA and even especially Juke Draw clerics and stuff, and Arcanea clerics as well. I think he's the least staff utility. I think he's like kind of similar to Riz in that regard. A little better because he's not as flawed statistically and everything. I think I'm going to put him in like the lower ranks of C. I think even Idean has more to do staff rank wise. I could potentially see him like move up a little bit here, but for example, I don't think he's as good as Natasha is. And I don't think Natasha is that spectacular at all. I don't think Reese is very good. Again, doesn't mean he cannot be good. There's just not a whole lot of things for him to do that make him worth doing, and I think his game is one where healing is at one of the worst things. One of the only games that I think where healing is worse than FE9 is FE10 with Laura, because in that game, like most of the time, the thing about vulnerates is they're not very efficient to use because you only heal 10 at a time, and healing almost always heals more than that, and is almost always more practical. But in Radiant Dawn, vulnerates heal 20, and you get herbs that heal 10, you get concoctions that heal like 30 or 40, and then you get elixirs that heal you to full. And not only do you get those, you get like quite a lot of them too, and they're most of the time they're better. Kind of depends on the context. Early game in Radiant Dawn, in Dawn Brigade, Laura is actually like really good to have around. You have Mekkah to heal people, but she just sacrifices her own HP instead, so she needs healing too. So no matter what, you're gonna need someone to either patch up someone else or patch up Mekkah. And then, sure, units like Soth can take on a lot of enemies, but eventually he's gonna need healing too, probably. So Laura can cover that. As the Dawn Brigade goes on, it departs from a traditional Fire Emblem where you have like your early game, you know, noobs that are just slowly raised up, and instead you get a bunch of overpowered Lagoos and pre-promotes that just don't need healing at all. And in fact, you tend to have like trouble justifying deploying her at all, since she is so fragile and so useless if your units are just stomping everything. Like, imagine having to choose between deploying the Black Knight and Laura, or even deploying Tormod and Laura, or even Vika and Laura. You generally go for the other units over Laura, because she's just not that good in comparison. Now, all these units are fragile to an extent. I've said some of them can take like one hit. For example, Reese on Lunatic gets one round, sure. But someone like Saul can take a hit from an FE6 enemy, even though they're pretty strong. Moulder definitely survives a hit from an enemy. Saffy can capture baits. If she doesn't capture baits, she's usually dead though. Lana survives a hit in most of her games. Laura does not survive a hit in Radiant Dawn. She just gets one hit KO'd. To be fair, a lot of units do. I've seen Leonardo get one hit KO'd. I have seen Mekkah get one hit KO'd. But Laura gets like one hit KO'd and doubled, like by pretty much everything too. So there's still a difference in like how frail she is. I just wanted to emphasize that. She dies, and when she dies, you actually get a game over early on too. It's kind of sad. Staff utility, not super relevant in Radiant Dawn. There is a rescue staff. She's not the best user of it, but there is a rescue staff technically. I think she wouldn't really have the opportunity to use it before part 4, but it could be useful there if you want it to be. And just generally, I think you'll have a better staff user to do it with, like Malizia. Restore can be useful at times, but I think in part 1 it will mostly be for poison, and that's it, and that's not very useful. There's a sleep staff, and that one can be good if she's raised. She can put Ike to sleep in 3:13, and that can be pretty useful, can save your butt in fact. So it could be nice. But generally I don't think Laura is very good at all, and I think I'm gonna put her like near Reese. I think she's a little better than Reese just because she's a little better long term. I feel like there's some more uses for her in long term, but not too much. Next I have Lissa from Awakening. Now I've always said Awakening, not my specialty when it comes to raiding units famed for fates, but I'm going to try my best here. I have played Awakening, and I found Lissa is like nice in the early game for healing people. I like to use her as a pair-up for Robin for quite a bit, because she gives him a little bit of magic and that can help him one-round KO things. Depends on the difficulty of course, but Robin needs a pair-up partner of some sort for Veteran to activate and make him stronger, and Lissa's pretty good for that. Generally that means Frederick goes with Crom in the early game, and it really works well for both of them as well. Sometimes you want to do like Robin Frederick for like stronger defenses and strength, but I think Lissa is a pretty good pair partner for Robin for a little bit. She can use the rescue staff just like almost any other Awakening units because it's E rank, but she has a standout magic, and I think for staff range, rescue range, I think every square can matter. So where higher magic, like both base and growth wise, is significant. It's not that many other units that can do it better. You get like Maribel and Rickon, but if they're better than her at using it, it's not by much. Later on you get like stabs on Falconites, for example, that can do it as well. But you can turn her into like a Dark Flyer, for example, if you really try very hard. So that alone bears mentioning, I suppose, even though I still think that if you're not grinding, then getting a Dark Flyer on anyone but like Robin with Guild Force is not going to be very timely within the game itself. But hey, it's just something I needed to mention. I think Lissa is mostly just useful as an early game healer and a rescue bot, and that's kind of about it when it comes to efficient play in Awakening. But I will say casually, she seems like a decent unit that actually has some long-term prospects. Of course, an Awakening using defensive units like Lissa is a little bit of a risk because of all the ambush spawns, so you really need to know how to keep her safe, kind of like with your Dancer. I think it's reasonable to assume that the player is competent enough to do this, and that they know not to put it like near forts or stairways where reinforcements could appear, but it does limit where she can go a little bit. But it's always a bad idea to get your healer attacked, so I'm not going to pretend that this is some kind of knock on Lissa that these other units don't have to deal with, but Awakening is especially ruthless with like its ambush reinforcements, so I just wanted to have mentioned it. So good early game healer generally. You definitely want it, especially on higher difficulties in Awakening. On hard mode, you might not need it anymore at some point. Units might be able to keep themselves alive, especially if they get some good skill combos. Like if they have like Saul, for example, they might be able to keep themselves alive. It really depends on the build you have. I think Lissa herself, she can probably turn into some kind of offensive juggernaut if you want it to be. I don't think it's her specialty. I kind of like thinking of Fire Emblem Warriors and like the fact that she has an axe there. That's kind of funny to think about. Maybe she can make her like a war cleric in Awakening 2, and it's like, doesn't seem like her most effective build, but it seems like a very fun one too. I think Lissa's alright. Maybe not super high, but I think like one of the better early game healers, so I'm thinking about among like here somewhere is probably decent for her. Maybe better than Sarah, I could see that. Let's put her like around here somewhere. I think that's decent for her. Again, not going to give her credit for how good her kids might be, like Owain for example. This is just about Lissa's utility, and no one else's. Then we have Sakura from Fire Emblem Fates, Birthright, and Revelation. I've played Revelation, I used Sakura. I was planning on using her actually, because I'm never going to get a chance to do it again until I play Birthright. But I got so disappointed. A lot of people call her the worst royal, which I think is true, but I'm not going to be like... Being the worst royal doesn't really mean anything. It's like being the worst paladin or something. It's like, whatever, dude. Royal isn't even a class. It's just a trait that means you can use Dragon Veins. And from where I'm at, being able to use Dragon Veins is a good thing. It doesn't really matter to me. Like, let's say she wasn't the royal, so it was just a normal unit. Would she be any worse? No, probably not. So, in fact, she would be worse because she couldn't use Dragon Veins. So, I'd rather her be a royal and then be the worst royal than being one of the best other units. You know what I mean? Being a royal is a good thing. It doesn't matter that Camilla's better, that Leo's better, that Xander's better, that Ryoma's better. All that matters is what Sakura can do. Sakura seems like a kind of like a GBA unit in Fate's game, if that makes sense. She seems to perform like similarly. It's just here you have a unit that can heal and do pretty much nothing else, and then everyone else has like some other cool stuff they can do. She can't help with dual strikes offensively for one. That's something I would like her to be able to do to contribute. Instead, you could do like defensive pair-ups with her, but that also doesn't seem very good because I don't think her bonuses are very good, being that she's in that healer class, and I don't think those bonuses are very great at all. Healing people is nice. She has to like compete with Jacob and Felicia over that job, depending on which one of those you have. But depending on what kind of game you're playing, that might still be useful for you. I know she joins like very early in the shared campaign until like Branch of Fate. And by early, I mean like she's only there for like 1 or 2 chapters. But the fact that she's there is like nice to get a little bit of XP on her, I guess. But in the main campaign, I never really found her useful and like worth keeping around. I remember in Revelation, for example, she joins and she's around for a bit, and then you just get like Shura at like level 14 promoted or something, or like level 10 promoted, and he can also use stabs, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll just use that guy instead. I just stopped having a reason that justified deploying her in Revelation for one. And in Birthright, I haven't played that game yet, and I don't plan to for a while because it seems really boring. But I mean, if other units need the durability boost from being healed every once in a while after taking on a bunch of enemies, then Sakura can be nice. There are some cool staves in Fates that are useful for like disabling enemies or making them weaker, but I don't think they're very useful in Birthright, because Birthright is just an easier game with enemies that have no skills at all. Whereas in Conquest, those will be very useful, but Sakura is not available in Conquest, so can't really rate her very highly based on that. So I didn't have a very good impression of Sakura in the Revelation, and I don't think she's very good in Birthright either, so I'm going to put her like an upper D right now. Better than Rys, and that's being generous, I think, from my experiences. If she's a lot better than Birthright, then I'm giving her credit for it, and let me know. But just from based on Revelations, this is kind of where I would put her in comparison to other units. Maybe worth putting like here instead, but not a whole lot higher. That's from what I can tell. On the next one, we have 3 houses units. Now, as I said, I usually judge 3 houses by their Part 2 canon experiences, or their canon appearances, and what class they are. But for these units, that doesn't really make any sense, because this tier is all about early game clerics. And especially for Marianne, who doesn't even appear in Part 2 unless you recruit her, like she cannot be an enemy, then it's like, okay, what is she supposed to be then? So instead I'm just like, okay, I'll just pick units that have like a faith proficiency that I haven't talked about yet. And I think these three are like pretty good representatives of healers in three houses, even though anyone can be a healer. I left off Linhardt, for example, even though he's pretty much primarily a healer for a lot of people, because, well, first of all, he's a boy, and that means he made an appearance in the Mage Boys, so I didn't feel like putting him on here for now. Cynthia was in the Magical Girls one, Dorothea was in the Magical Girls one as well, so I think it makes sense to just have these three here for now. So Mercedes, she is really liked by a lot of people for her ability to learn Fortify relatively early, as well as just Heal and Physic, which are of course very useful. But I think Fortify is actually very overrated as a healing utility on Maddening. It kind of depends on your playstyle a little bit. I liked having it for my first run on Crimson Flower, where I was playing slowly and I could Fortify to heal my units. But there were a couple things that changed my perspective on this. One of them is the fact that I love to use Bernadetta, and Bernadetta relies on having low HP in order to make Vengeance good. And it sounds like a very niche complaint to make, one unit that uses one gimmick, but Vengeance is so freaking good on Maddening, especially on kill boss maps, or just killing any enemy in general. And it suits with the playstyle of Maddening so well, where you just kill all the enemies that can attack you to get ready for the next ones. And Fortify gets in the way of that, so that's one reason I don't think Fortify is that good. The other reason is just units get one-rounded a lot on Maddening, like a lot of them get one-rounded, and as a result, healing is not that useful, period, and mass healing especially is less useful. Three Houses is I think much better if you play it as a player phase game, where you kill enemies before they attack you, and you can't do out of range, or you make sure you just don't get attacked by enemies at all when avoidable, or you minimize that as much as possible. And in those cases, healing in general becomes a much less useful trait, and that's going to make these units rate a little bit worse. I think before release, Live to Serve was a pretty highly rated ability of Mercedes. It's her personal skill, that's her heal herself along with allies. But Mercedes is so fragile herself and not that great at combat, especially early on, that I rarely found this useful. Even if she was damaged, it was almost always the same. Like, I would still not get her attacked even if she was not damaged, because she's just so fragile and so kind of bad at counterattacking. She doesn't really learn any great reason spells that are like worth talking about. It's not like she learns Meteor or anything, or Dark Spikes. So I think generally she has most of her utility from healing. I do think the early game physic is very nice, and I don't think she's bad at all in part 1. Part 2 I definitely found her less useful in than in part 1. Overall, like that basically makes her an early game healer, right? So let's say like around here somewhere is probably reasonable for her. Probably the best of these. There are points in the games where Fortify is nice to have. There are playstyles where it is nice to have, but I don't think it's especially great. I think she's a little overrated at this point, and I don't think she can really not do anything else besides healing, really. She can just be a good bishop or Gremory, and that's about it. There's not a whole lot she can do. Then we have Fish Girl Fling, and the thing I like the most about Fling is her rescue ability, like just the fact that she learns the rescue spell by herself with almost no extra effort put in from the player. Her range isn't fantastic. Warp and rescue ranges were really nerfed in Three Houses, but it is a very interesting spell that allows for a lot of interesting things. It's like having Reposition or Smite on a unit, but instead it's multiple tiles, and it's super cool to have. She also learns Fortify, but as I said, I'm not a super big fan of Fortify. I only used Flame as like a full-time healer in what run was it? With my Blue Lions run, my New Game Plus hard mode run. So not a very good measurer of how good she would perform on Maddening. It's like the opposite thing almost. Hard mode, New Game Plus. But she was fun to use. I definitely like to use her at least once. And she was alright. Not super fantastic, not a great offensive unit, even on hard mode, New Game Plus. So I think that shows how good she would be on Maddening at fighting. I like her ability where I like the fact that you can like reclass to Pegasus Knight and then turn her into an adjutant for Setheth and give him more damage output. That is pretty fun. Other than that, I don't think she really does a whole lot as a unit. I think she's actually one of the worst Three Houses units. She's not like quite a student, but she's still kind of like one. You can instruct her. You can make her your dancer. I actually think she's like one of the better dancers in the game, just because she has the charm to become one, and she really likes becoming one. So that is nice. So I like that she gives you a free dancer on any route that's not the Crimson Flower route if you haven't really recruited one, and it means you don't have to go out of your way to recruit one separately. But she doesn't really have any traits that make her like a good dancer. It's just she's better than to sacrifice someone else to be your dancer. That's what I think. Now, I'm not going to rate her according to dancer utility because it's just unfair. All the utility from dancing comes from the dancer class, not from Flame herself. And anyone can be a dancer class. So with that in mind, I'm going to have to put Flame like pretty low, I think, actually. Like, would she be a D tier unit? I don't know. I think Rescue is interesting enough to put her like C. So, maybe like near Laura or Idean. Watch me screw up my layout right now. Yep, there we go. That's all screwed up. Alright, so let's go with... She kind of does remind me of Idean with her like warp and rescue utility, so that's maybe makes me want to put her around there somewhere. Let's go with this for now, I think. I think this is reasonable. So, last but not least is Marianne. Definitely one of my favorites from Three Houses, at least from the perspective of someone who played Golden Deer first. I have a soft spot for Marianne, but that goes for like all the Golden Deer. She is interesting. One thing that doesn't really get highlighted a lot is like she learns like heal and physic and stuff, and she has a riding boon, so she's pretty good to get to like a mounted healer kind of thing, like a holy knight kind of thing. But she also has a pretty good reason spell that she can use Thorn and everything. And Thorn is super nice to have, so that's pretty cool too. I definitely noticed in my first playthrough that not having anything other than Nosferatu was pretty annoying, so having Thorn would have helped me a lot. I think Marianne is still best as a healer. I like how she has the silence spell, which I haven't really found a lot of use for in Three Houses. I always tried when I could, but silencing mages so they can attack you is like pretty cool, especially on Manding when you're always trying to reduce the enemy fire against you in the early game. I have like a funny story once where I would silence an enemy mage, and then he couldn't attack me normally, but he could still use his gambit on me because he has like a melee gambit. He didn't have like resonant lightning or anything. He just had like assault troop or something, so he still wrecked me. It was pretty annoying. So yeah, Marianne I don't think is particularly awesome in Three Houses. Her personal skill is absolute garbage. I don't think there's anything else that really stands out about her. Like a personal skill that heals you, but only if you are next to a horse or like an animal is like, okay, well first of all she shouldn't even be attacked, so it's like Live to Serve but even worse. But I think she's like a reasonably capable offensive unit with like quite some tricks up her sleeve. She learns Frozen Lance as a what's it called, budding talent if you raise her lance rank often enough, which also gives her more access to Holy Knight if you wanted to have her if you want to have it on her. I would generally just stick with Bishop, but I do think Frozen Lance has its uses, killing strong bosses, or just nuking enemies in general without having to rely on spells. Frozen Lance gives you like more access to some more oomph, so I think that is nice. I've never really tried it out, but I know it's good. So actually I think Marianne is like better than Mercedes for one. She seems more useful to me. Like the higher access to a horse is also interesting to me. So I think it's actually like reasonable to have her up here, or maybe up here. I think she's pretty good. Like just the fact that she is also able to lean into like the Pegasus Knight class, for example, use Frozen Lance in that is also pretty interesting to me. So I think she's pretty good. It's just I've never really had the opportunity to use her on Manding. I never recruited her in other houses, and I haven't played Golden Deer Manding yet. That is the one part I haven't played fully on Manding. So I don't know as much as on Marianne as I want to, but I think she's an interesting unit and I like her a lot. So I'm gonna put her in B tier for now. Please don't flame me. And that is the whole thing. So I ended up with them spread out quite a bit. It's not quite as top heavy as Camilla, but it looks pretty interesting. I think generally the fact that this C tier is so huge like speaks volumes about what I think of healers in general. Usually their utility doesn't extend very far beyond the early game. You get better alternatives a lot of the time, or your utility just kind of fizzles out. Units are able to like hold their own without healing. But in the early game they tend to be like very useful. Like if this was just based on their joining chapters, or like the first 3 or 4 chapters they would be around, they'd be a lot higher, I feel like. But as it is, they just kind of fizzle out in utility. You could say they fall off in a way, but I don't want to say that because I'm so tired of that meme. Okay, so let me know what you think of my ratings, particularly the ones that I'm not overly familiar with. Next tier list video is going to be a big tier list again, based on what my Patreons submit. I will rate those units and put them in the tier list I made before, so check that one out if you haven't already. And I will see you guys next time. Also, let me know what archetypes you want me to do next, because there's still a couple left that I haven't done yet. That's all. Peace out. Goodbye.